Okay, good morning. So last week, we were short of completing the second half of verse 2 in the chapter 2 of Amos, part 1 of Israel. So let's start this morning in Amos chapter 2, verse 7, and we'll finish that second half of verse 7. That pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor, and turn aside the way of the meek. And this is the verse where we left off, this part of the verse. And a man and his father will go unto the same maid to profane my holy name. So we have here gross immorality. And I searched and I found that the most appropriate word in Hebrew for the meaning of a maid would be a young woman or a servant. So before we discuss this immoral, perverted spirit that still strives today as then in the day of Amos, let's read a verse here or two out of Leviticus in the Old Testament that would have been relevant to a people claiming to be the sea of God, the nations of God. Leviticus chapter 20, verses 11 through 12. The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall be put to death. They have committed incest. Their blood is upon them. In Leviticus chapter 18, verse 8, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. And Leviticus 18, verses 22 through 23. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It's an abomination. And you shall not lie with any beast and defile yourself with it. Neither shall any woman give herself to a beast to lie with it. It is perversion. So this is law right here. This is law. Old covenant law for the people of God. Now remember now, in the last lesson, Israel part 1, that extraordinary greed Israel had. They sold the righteous for silver and the poor for a pair of shoes. They even desired the dust on the heads of the poor. They wanted that dust too. So we discussed that last lesson. And Israel had laws in the old covenant that just don't apply to this new covenant era. A lot has changed since the death, burial, and resurrection of the Savior of mankind, Jesus Christ. A lot has changed. Just remember the greed. In these Leviticus verses we read, just remember the greed, the unrighteous behavior for personal gain or profit that they harbored. Now, a man and his father having sexual tendencies and actions with a maid or prostitute or even a servant, that was not breaking the law then. There is no incest or fornication and adultery happening here. Sexual relations with the same woman as far as a father and son go was forbidden. It was a gross perversion of the moral order of the law, and participating in such an act, it profaned the holy name of God. And again, remember the greed, the lust for wealth, the lust for materialism Israel harbored. Now let's read in Exodus chapter 21, verses 7 through 11. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her, or marriage by contract, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed, to sell her unto a strange nation. He shall have no power, since he hath dealt deceitfully with her. And if he hath betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. And if he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free, without money. So a man could profit. A man could gain profit from putting his daughter in a position of servitude, to pay off a debt, or to pay in full a particular financial default, or simply because it would save money. It would save wealth to just sell her away. See, the wealthy, greedy men of Israel were shysters, taking advantage of the poor to gain their daughters as sexual servants, paying off debts with sex. It still happens today. Debts in whatever fashion. You've got your TMZ and all that out there over through the years. You know what I'm talking about. So in Amos's day, God's holy name was profaned for the prostitution in the temple. Temple prostitution. So Amos chapter 2 verse 8. And they lay themselves down upon clothes, laid to pledge by every altar. And they drink the wine of the condemned in the house of their God. Little g, God. So Amos in verse 7 touched on the temple prostitution, and he will continue with the misbehavior in the temple here in verse 8. And you know, you'll recognize a lot of temple language as we move along in this book of Amos. And if you read from beginning to end in the book of Amos, you so shall see that there was an abundance of irreverence in the temple as they worshipped their little g gods. Let's read verse 8 again. And they lay themselves down upon clothes laid to pledge by every altar, and they drank the wine of the condemned in the house of their God. So if a person owed a debt, certain pairs of their garments or clothes, they could be taken in a pledge. But their clothes, they had to be given back to them by sunset, for humanitarian reasons. So this whole theme of Amos's prophecy of judgment is for crimes against humanity. And we have seen this thus far from chapter 1 to here in chapter 2, verse 7 and 8. We've seen it. Crimes against humanity. Let's read here in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 12 and 13. And if he is a poor man, you shall not sleep on his pledge. When the sun goes down, you shall restore to him the pledge, that he may sleep in his cloak, and bless you, and it shall be righteousness to you before the Lord your God. You see, the man in the house of their God took the garment or the cloak of someone else as a pledge, a debt pledge. And they were forbidden to sleep on it, since it had to be returned per the law to the debtor for him to sleep on by day's end. And Amos is accusing the greedy, wealthy here, these greedy, arrogant, wealthy, of breaking this law here in Deuteronomy that we just read. So they lay themselves down. That's the posture they took in feasting in the temple. They lay themselves down. And we can jump way ahead into Amos chapter 6 verse 4 to give you an idea. He says, you lie on beds adorned with ivory and lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fattened calves. They are an unappreciative bunch. They're lummoxes. So they lay themselves down at every altar, leaning back on their ivory couches, leaning on one elbow, drinking the wine of the condemned. The wine, the wine that was unjustly fined, the unjustly fined bought. The fellas that were unjustly fined bought this wine that they're slurping on. The ones that had legal judgment against them. And see, fines then could be paid with, agricultural commodities, such as we see here in the wine. And these courts in Israel, and we went over this in part 1 of Israel last week, these courts, they were perverted and they were altered unjustly with bribes. Last lesson in part 1 of Israel was all about the bribes. The bribes, that spirit of bribery. So Amos here is condemning the arrogant, greedy, wealthy, wrongly purchased wine while lounging and feasting, laying on wrongly gotten garments. And worse yet, they are in their gluttony, enjoying these things beside every altar in the place of their gods. They are enjoying not the fruits of their labor, they're enjoying up there slouched on the couches in the temple, they're enjoying the fruits of their perversion of justice beside the altar of those high places that so often were condemned by the prophets of old. Let's read here in Hosea chapter 10 verse 8. The high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. Thorn and thistle shall grow up on their altars, and they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. So the immoralities, these wretched immoralities practiced in heathen worship. And again, I say this all the time, and I stick to it. Not a daggone thing has changed from Genesis to Revelation and to this new covenant. And it will continue. It'll keep on going in this world without end. And there are morally sound unbelievers in this world that dress more appropriately than some of these youth groups that say they represent the God of the Bible. Look at the dress code in the world now. We have come a long way from what I'm getting ready to quote from Paul here. We've come a long way from women dressing modestly, with decency and propriety. Not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds. A woman clothed with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. And for the most part, men and women, well, they alter their looks. They alter their looks with makeup, push-up bras, them big calves and big muscles from steroids, all to make others lust after them. All to make others lust after them. Ain't nothing changed from the day of Amos till today. This gay marriage, this Olympic athlete men getting sex changes in their women now, that should not shock you one bit. This has been going on. Beauty's in the heart, man. Beauty's in the heart. Till next time.